hungover, half asleep, just sent a bad decision home. Quick to anticipate which body part she'll hate while she puts a pot of coffee on. Every morning, same reaction, absolute unsatisfaction. Hey, hey, sister, you can let your hair down. You ain't done nothing bad enough to feel so guilty. You're just the product of a world in a rush. This crazy life we're living is all a part of growing up. She's under self-attack. Can't do this, can't do that, or she might lose her precious friends. Watch your figure, watch your weight. Clean off that empty plate. Girl, you know that ain't no way to live. Time for social intervention. Listen, girl, pay close attention. Hey, hey, sister, you can let your hair down. You ain't done nothing bad enough to feel so guilty. You're just the product of a world in a rush. This crazy life we're living is all a part of growing up. You ain't ever gonna please them, but you don't have to worry what they think. You don't need them. Hey, hey, sister, you can let your hair down. You ain't done nothing bad enough to feel so guilty. You're just the product of the world in a rush. This crazy life we're living is all a part of growing. Crazy life we're living is all a part of growing up.
So every year since 1996, yowza, been going to NAMM, first as a musician with the studio at home, and then eventually, full-time producer engineer. So been going to NAMM for a long, long time. Now, when you go and hang out with gear companies, for instance, you'd be surprised. They're actually musicians, people that work in the music industry that have found full-time jobs working for companies. And one of those is a friend of ours, a friend of my wife and I, and her name is Laura Davidson, Laura Clapp Davidson, and she works for Shure. So a few years ago, she gave us a CD of her music, and it was kind of folky and acoustic and cool and all that kind of stuff. And we said, we should use you in a video. Maybe when we do a Shure video, you could do something like that. So I was thinking like an acoustic kind of folky track. Anyway, a couple of years ago, we went to She Rocks. You might know She Rocks at NAMM. It's a great event. Really, really amazing. Check it out. Go to NAMM this year. Go to She Rocks. And at the very end, they had like a Led Zeppelin, tribute band, I suppose it was. Phenomenal musicians. And this woman gets up and sings. And it's Laura. And we were like, wait, aren't you folk rock person? And she gets up and belts out full-blown Robert Plant style bluesy rock vocals. It was really freaking awesome. So Shure have a new condenser. It's their home studio recording condenser. I've always talked about $300 being the kind of threshold for a good condenser microphone that can do everything. Could be a vocal mic, could be overheads, could be a piano mic, could be anything that we like. So it's $199 with a regular clip. If you want it with the shock mount, it's $269. Still under $300. So I suppose the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The whole track that you just heard, everything that we could was using an SM4, overheads, room mics, vocals, you name it, all was using that particular mic. So it's going to be pretty special. And then everything else, of course, was Shure microphones. So it's a Shure-tastic video. This song was written by Laura, so this is her own track. Thank you ever so much, Gilly, for playing drums, and Jamie for doing the heavy lifting. Jamie Humphreys of Six String Alliance played all the guitars and all the basses. So wonderful, wonderful work from Jamie. And check out, of course, Laura's incredible vocal. So I did a mix. Here is the drums. So we have the Shure SM4s as overheads here. They are mic'd as ever in phase with the snare, meaning they're both pointing at the snare and they're exactly the same distance from the center of the snare to each capsule. The SM7 you see over here is on the hi-hat. I'm a huge fan of the SM7 or SM57s on hi-hats. I like the mid-range kind of like pronounced area on it. I've never been a fan of a small diaphragm condenser, even though obviously 451s, etc., are really famous for that. So if I do use a small diaphragm condenser, it's usually taped together with either an SM7 or an SM57, a la Dave Jordan, who used that, of course, most famously on Alice in Chains and Jane's Addiction. Now, the 57 on the top is nothing new, just what you'd expect, sounds great. And then last but no means least is a Beta 52 on the inside of the kick, which definitely has a lot of attack. I mean, the Betas, I believe, have a neodymium capsule, which is full, like mid-range pronounced. So no need to add any EQ on that. And then lastly, we had a little bit of fun. The thing about this room is it's actually designed as a venue. And you might hear a bit of ambience, a bit. But that's the point. It's a bit. It's not this huge echoey room, which you would expect from this parquet floor and, you know, quite high ceilings. They've done a lot of work in here to dampen it down so they can have shows in here. They do events, they have bands play. So what we did is we put a pair of 57s up against the wall, and then we took the kick and snare out of the interface and put it through the PA in here. So we mic'd up the room in here just to get a little bit more oomph from the kick and snare so it fills the room a bit more. Didn't use any drum samples whatsoever. You can download the multitracks, of course, and do whatever you like to them and mix them. Or you can use samples if you like. But it's quite a straightforward mix. I've got the kick down here. I did it in the last hour and a half, 2 hours before we did this. So fairly quick mix. The kick is my usual. Got some boost at 60 hertz. I've got some 100-ish hertz cut just to let the bass breathe a little bit. And then a big dip at 350. There's a lot of attack on that already. The R bass was in there because I'm not using a sub kick or anything. So R bass at 60 hertz you can see here. Here's with and without. With. Without. Okay, let's put the EQ back in before it. So a huge difference. Now, I was messing around. I was using the R-Comp, which is my regular compressor. So I did think about trying the CLA 76s, but I actually found that the low end was they're really bright and aggressive, but it wasn't good on a kick, which is not really, you know, unusual because most people wouldn't use an 1176 on a kick, but you could use it on a snare. But in this instance, if we go to the snare, for instance, it's tuned pretty high and quite aggressively. So I did a ton of low end boost here and a ton of high-end boost. Here's a before with no EQ, compression or effects. Now there's a bus one here that's actually sending to the overheads. The reason why I'm sending to the overheads, I'm actually using a compressor on the overheads that compresses every time the snare plays. So if we make that pre-fade, which it is, we can mute the snare and have a listen with the compressor on and off on the overheads. There's some more volume there, but listen how the snare is being ducked when it's on. The loudest thing in the overheads without the compressor on is the snare. So I'll explain that again. So what I'm doing is I'm sending from the snare into the overhead mic. So every time the snare plays, it ducks, compresses. Just enough, just to kind of just dip it out a little bit out of the overheads. Now you're asking, why was I doing that? Well, it's because we're not using any tom mics. So I wanted the snare to be dipped a little bit so that every time the toms played, they would cut. So let's put the compressor back on now. So have a listen there. The tom just sings so much better. But there's also a lot of really bright cymbals. So if you have a listen with nothing on it, and again, the cymbals are much, much louder than the tom. So I'm using a de-esser here that ducks out some of the high mids, really where the cymbals are getting overly offensive. So we've got EQ here, rolling off the low lows. I don't need the kick to be bleeding, at least the low end of the kick to be bleeding in the overheads. I don't want any phase cancellation issues, which might happen because whatever you do, the overhead mics are a lot further away than the kick mic inside of the kick or just outside of it in this instance. Ducking out the low lows, ducking out the low mids so that when the toms play, they also sing a little bit. And then, of course, the compression at the end, as explained before. So, other than that, I've got a snare verb, and I've got some EQ going into it, getting rid of some low lows, getting rid of some high highs. It's not quite the Abbey Road technique, but it's pretty close. There's a little bit of brightness going on, some high mids, and there's a little bit more body being added. The snare itself, if we go back to the snare track, did need a lot of low end added to it because he tuned it very high. I mean, I don't think there's anywhere in this song where he plays a 4-on-the-floor groove. So what we could conceivably do is add another compressor here and key that to a new input. Let's make it 21. So we'll make it 21 off of the kick. Now what we'll do is we'll duck out a little bit of that kick. So it's on pre-fade now. Let's turn off the kick. So now what we're doing is sending a pre-fade signal of the kick to the snare drum last compressor. So listen to it with and without. Now with. So you can do all this fancy gating if you like, or you can just compress it. So what we're doing is we're actually just compressing every time the kick plays. You don't have to worry about, frankly, it's so much quicker and easier than setting up gates. So every time the kick plays, it ducks out of the snare track. Let's add the snare verb in. And what I'm doing is I'm using my good old-fashioned D-verb. Comes free with this DAW, with Pro Tools, whatever DAW you use. Frankly, I always use the stock verb. So I'm using it at typical 751, 3/4 of a second. As I said before, I'm EQing it so the low lows and the high highs are wiped off a little bit. And then the only other interesting thing is that we did print some room mics, which are good, but I wanted it to be a bit bigger. First thing I did was roll off super low lows, cut off a bit of low mids. I could probably go up a little bit higher on that, about here. And actually put a lo-fi on it. So I distorted it ever so slightly, which the first thing it does with the saturation control on Avid's lo-fi is just take the high mids and just duck them in a little bit, distort them ever so slightly so it's a little less offensive. And then I actually added a R verb on it with just over a second worth of reverb. So let's have a listen before and after. Here's a before. Here's with the EQ on. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference, just no extra low rumble. It isn't necessarily needed to be there. Here's with the lo-fi. Makes that kick and snare sound so much thicker, doesn't it? Let's go to the chorus and see what it does to the cymbals. Makes everything a little bit more dangerous and dark. I like it. And then the R verb here, we'll just make it bigger still. So I'm using it, you know, at 37% wet dry. So it's about 37% of the plugin, and the other 63% is the natural room sound. And now with the full drum kit, all of those elements together. Pretty awesome. The only other things that are special really on this mix to notice are the fact that I've got 3 drum buses going on. I've got one set here, which is essentially just gently compressing it. That's just barely even touching it. REQ again, some low roll off, a little bit of 350, a tiny bit of high, so really just gentle stuff. And then an L2 just shaving off the transient. Barely at all. It's probably just in the last chorus. Barely doing anything. But here's the fun one. We've got an absolutely annihilated one. Same EQ. It's the same exact plugins on the parallel drum bus here, but I'm just annihilating it a bit more. Put the two together. It's subtle, but that extra parallel kind of just adds energy in that. And those two are then summed together with some gentle compression. Half to 1 dB, and then a tiny bit of L2 just to shave off just to really kind of control the kick and snare together. I like just getting those two things to just be touching, just both getting a little nip of a dB or two off the front of the transient, just to control it. Other than that, the usual bass trick, just to take the DI. And then take the amp. So I've taken about 200 hertz and below off of the amplifier, just so it doesn't interfere with the DI, and then the DI about 200 hertz and above is wiped off. Not entirely, but put the two together. You don't get any phase cancellation between the two different sources, because if you've got a DI and a bass amp both very slightly out of phase with each other, all the lows will get cancelled out. So I just remove them from each other's path. Very typical thing. And then an overall bussing together of the two elements, a lot of mid-range boost to give it lots of personality, lots of nose, but then the R bass, which I think is really is a secret at 80 hertz. And then really the last thing that really ties the bass together, really ties the room together, really ties the bass together, and that's the MV2, which is giving us low energy and high energy. So basically it's compressing, it's bringing up like in a parallel motion, as it were, bringing up all the energy there from below and then squashing the transients down and just evening out the bass. The MV2 is a winner on bass guitars. You're going to have fun downloading these tracks. I think the only other thing really to remember on this, I did barely anything on the electrics, just a little bit of EQ, but the acoustics I did add quite a lot of mid-range back to, and also duck with a bit of de-essing. My usual trick of the reverb pan to the opposite side of the acoustic guitar. So in the verse, I have the guitars sort of about 50-50, choruses 100-100. And the reverb is always opposite. So if there's an acoustic guitar on one side, its reverb's on the other. If there's an acoustic guitar on this side, its reverb's on the other. Same with the electric. It just adds some width and also doesn't make it a complete mess so that all the reverb is underneath the guitar. There are times when I like that. So like if we go to the solo, for instance, you know, it is going mono down the middle and then a stereo reverb coming off it. And of course, Jamie's solo is phenomenal. And the guitar EQ there is a bit more mids. His tone was a little scoopy for me. It was fantastic, but it was a little overly bright, which I didn't need. There's still some high mid boost, but there's some 2K cut and then a lot of like mid kind of which makes it tough. So last but definitely no means least is Laura's vocal. Now on the lead vocal itself, there's a fair amount of compression. I could get in there and even stuff out and actually automate the vocals more, but we're doing a very quick mix here, really to kind of show what we're doing. I put a de-esser at first. I've got some low roll-off, some cut there, and then the RVox, which is a wonderful, wonderful compressor. Going into an REQ, just to boost some low mids on her voice to give it a little bit more body, and then a bit of mids and high mid boost. Going into another compressor lightly. Don't be put off by the amount of compression because it's all fairly light, but it's serial compression. The MV2s are used quite aggressively at the end to bring that vocal forward.
She's under self-attack. Can't do this, can't do that, or she might lose her precious friends. Watch your figure, watch your weight. Clean off that empty plate. Girl, you know that ain't no way to live. Time for social intervention.
I'm using a de-esser before the delay to make sure that I'm not exaggerating. I don't want to hear a delay going ba 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 ba. I don't want to hear all that stuff. I've had people like reject a mix saying there's some digital clipping going on, and all it is like an S or a T going. I get it. It's annoying if they hear that. So I de-ess quite aggressively going into a delay so it's not going to exaggerate those S's and T's, number one. We're using a great tape delay here. And from that, we're going into an R comp. Now, the R comp is actually being fed from the vocal as well. So it's ducking the delay when she's singing. So you're going to hear a little bit, of course, while she's singing, but between it, the delay will come up.
She's under self-attack. Can't do this, can't do that, or she might lose her precious friends. Watch your figure, watch your weight. Clean off that empty plate.
And apart from that, backgrounds, like all the ones at the end, absolutely nothing on them at all.
Hey sister, you keep down. Ain't done nothing bad. Hey sister, you can let your head down. You ain't done nothing bad. Hey sister, you can let your head down. You ain't.
And our master, all I've done is stick an L2 across it. So there you go. Everything possibly we could do. Everything's a Shure microphone. The SM4 is on full display here. Honestly, with or without the shock mount's 269, microphone on its own is 199. You know, I think ultimately at the end of the day, the only differentiator between having an amazing recording and not having an amazing recording is really the musicianship and the quality of the song. At $199 now for a microphone, and there's so much good stuff out there. We all know that you can create absolutely incredible music as long as the artists are delivering, and frankly, you're just not messing it up. You're not putting too much EQ or compression in the way when you don't know whether to EQ and compress. None of this stuff was printed like this. Everything is printed really, really super open, and all of the compression and EQ is being applied at mixing. So I think, you know, take as much of the steps that you can here on the mix when you do it, mix it however you want, but just be aware that these raw tracks are completely untreated. Obviously, the distorted guitars are distorted, and any effects that Jamie used are printed, but then that would be in any situation. If you stick a mic in front of an amplifier and a guitar player's got pedals, those are his pedals, and sometimes he uses compressor pedals. But everything else is the raw tracks. Remember that, they're the raw tracks. So this is the sound of the SM4 and a 57 and all other kinds of fun stuff. So thanks ever so much for watching. Please download the multi-tracks down below. I think it's a great mic. I really do think it's a great mic. I've just got to say it again, the only differentiator really is going to be on the performance. There is a reason why people have very, very expensive microphones from a commercial point of view, and I totally understand. You know, when you walk into a studio and you see a $10,000 mic, it makes people feel warm and fuzzy. And there are advantages in very expensive mics, and they can sound absolutely phenomenal. But I will continually repeat this till the day I die. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is about the quality of the song and the performance more than anything else. And here we have a wonderful singer, a great song. Oh, by the way, she wrote the song. This is her own song. And we just put some great musicians behind it. And this is the result. So check out the link down below to check out the microphone. Download the multi-tracks. Thanks ever so much for watching. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, goodbye.